Welcome to Beyond Neutral. I'm your host, Paula Reed. I think of the journey of life as a road that we're driving down. We get to speed up on the straightaways, ease back on the curves, and I don't know about you, but I've certainly had the obstacle in the roadway that I never expected to see, and I had to either slam my brakes on or swerve to avoid hitting it. But whether we're talking about our careers or relationships or even just managing through life's phases, life is all about shifting and moving from one place to another. The challenge is that sometimes, in trying to get from where we were to where we want to be, we can get stuck while we're trying to shift. And we land in what I call the neutral space, where we're applying old ways of thinking to new situations. Join me and some incredibly inspiring guests as we talk about what it takes to shift into gear and get to where you want to be. Because here's the deal, if you're sitting in neutral, you're going nowhere. Welcome to this episode of Beyond Neutral. Today, for my guest, I have Jeff Thompson. He has had an amazing career in the footwear industry, and I have had the pleasure of knowing Jeff for most of that, actually all of that time. Is that right? Yeah, all of that time in the footwear industry, now that I think about it. Yeah. Jeff, you've had a really interesting career. Currently, you are the Vice President of Product Development Operations at Merrell Footwear, correct?
Yes,
and
part of Wolverine Worldwide.
Part of Wolverine Worldwide, right. That's always a mouthful to say. And we're speaking with Jeff today from his new home in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. So Jeff started his career in design, actually, with Hasbro, where you have the notoriety of actually having a G.I. Joe action figure named after you, correct?
Correct. I was.
And what was the figure called?
His name was Blastoff.
Blastoff.
Blastoff. Yeah, it was. I was a vehicle designer for the G.I. Joe team there, and as being part of the team, and a lot of people that were in the boys' toy design. It was you being picked to become a G.I. Joe and have it modeled after you was something that the guys on the Joe team definitely got it, but the other people in the other teams, like the Tonka team and things like that. Everyone wanted to be a G.I. Joe.
Everyone wanted to be a G.I. Joe guy.
Yeah,
and your figure has stood the test of time, hasn't it?
It is. Yeah, it's still around. It was a small, sub force within G.I. Joe. They were called the Mega Marines, and it was designed to compete with the Aliens franchise. And so with G.I. Joe, we had to create our own stories. And so that was what we created to compete with the Aliens toys that were already out. So I was Blastoff. It was one of the guys in that group, which was interesting because there were so many guys from New England that were in Rhode Island and had their names. They wouldn't put the little bio card that was on the back. Mine said, we had my full name, and it was from Kirkwood, Missouri, where I grew up, and so it was pretty cool. And
that's awesome.
It was crazy how much the people looked like some of the characters. I mean, the actual G.I. Joe figures looked like the real people. Mine, unfortunately, didn't, because I was an early adopter of the shaved head look, and this is like
G.I. Joe wear a helmet? Didn't G.I. Joe wear a helmet?
So they put a helmet on me because
okay, there you go. That's perfect.
So
that's perfect.
So mine does not really look like me, but
that's okay. Well, it sounds like actually a pretty cool way to start out your career. Earlier in your career, you get an action figure named after you. That's pretty cool. So you made a transition from being a toy designer into footwear, and started your career at Converse in design, and then evolved and eventually went to Timberland, where you made that transition into product development, right?
I zigzagged a lot at Timberland. At Converse, when I started, it was in Advanced Concepts. You'd place me there with Dan. And from there, I went into development and then product management. And then I left and went to Timberland. I was at Converse probably for a couple of years.
Okay. And then you had a very long career at Timberland, 20 years, right?
Yeah, 22 and a half years.
22 and a half years, right. So you've had this career where you've transitioned from design to development to advanced concepts, kind of a lot of adjustments early on, and then a 22 and a half year run at the same organization before leaving there. And now you've moved, and in that role, in that organization, you had a number of different roles, correct? Yeah. And then now transitions to Asia.
Yeah, I've had a pretty varied career path in terms of the disciplines I was involved in. And I think, when I was looking for the role that I currently have, when talking to people, I think people would look at whether my LinkedIn profile or my resume, they're like, you started in design and then you were in development and engineering, and designers going in development and engineering. And then I went to product management, to Timberland Pro, to back to development. We, I had innovation at one point reporting up into me. And then I took on a larger role in the footwear organization in terms of just being the VP of footwear. So I was there for a long time.
You zigzagged.
I had a lot of different roles, and I think that proved to be a benefit to me, both in my understanding of the process from front to back, and then also just getting varied experiences. I think was really beneficial.
So, can you recall, as you're thinking about some of those transitions throughout your career? Can you recall any moment where you had to really kind of stop and rethink the way that you were approaching something because you were bringing something to this that maybe didn't necessarily apply in the same way and created a challenge for you?
Yeah, almost every change.
There you go.
Every job I did, it was, I think the first one was when I went from design at Timberland into development and engineering. At the time,
transition was a challenge.
Yeah, because it was, I had expressed my desire to do. I felt like I could do more than just draw shoes.
Yeah.
And I said, I'd like to be able to take on more of a leadership role. And I thought it was going to be leading design and development. And in turn, I was put in front of development and engineering, and it's like, the designers were sitting over there, and I went from drawing shoes to being in charge of development and commercial, the commercialization process and getting things ready to go into the supply chain. And it was uncomfortable. And I at the time I was nervous about it. Like I said, it was uncomfortable. But as I moved through my career at Timberland, from that role to the subsequent roles, I kind of got comfortable being uncomfortable, and I enjoyed it. And, it takes a while to get used to something new. And the other adjustment I realize is that, you don't have to know everything right off the bat. I'm experiencing that right now with Merrell. I know a lot about development, but I don't know that much about the Wolverine organization, how it works. Certainly Merrell's a new brand to me, a brand that I've known well being in the industry, but I want to be able to understand and know everything that was going on immediately. And I realize I've only been doing this for a few months now. I've been at Wolverine for a little over a year, but in the Merrell role since October. So I'm still figuring all that out. And I have to check myself to say, okay, you don't need to know how everything is done immediately. But
that's a tough thing too, isn't it? It's a tough thing. Yeah.
Any new job is going to be tough. And even if you're quote unquote subject matter expert, you still have to understand who are the key relationships that you have to build, who does, who's doing what, how the process works, because it's similar to what I was used to at Timberland, but it's still different. And you just have to get that. And it's, every week, what I was telling people when I joined the thing is like every week is like a fog lifts. I start to see and understand things better. Because at first
it's interesting that you said that, even if you're a subject matter expert, right? And I heard this quote the other day that I thought was fascinating. and it was an expert has one answer and a beginner has many. And I've also heard it said an expert has one question and a beginner has many. And so talk to me a little bit about that, that the curiosity that becomes so important in that discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be able to ask questions, and I think the biggest thing is understanding is like you don't have to know all the answers, it is, asking questions and knowing that the only dumb question is the one you don't ask, right? And so being comfortable like saying I don't know. A lot of people like they feel like they have to have the answers for everything. I mean, maybe that's the expert you're talking about. It's like, but you don't, and you shouldn't.
And you shouldn't, because you should be open to learning from other people as well, right? Yeah.
And you should listen to the people on your team. Like I benefited from coming into the Merrill role specifically. I've got a very experienced team, and the people who are my direct reports are incredibly helpful to me. I mean, I'm not afraid to say, it's like, hey, I don't know what this is. I don't know how to do this. Tell me what to do. I get the process. I get what we're doing, but I don't know how it's done here. And, I've got a very, a great group of direct reports who are, they've got institutional knowledge. They're open to it. We get along well. And they've made that transition into the brand really easy.
So that one of the things that it requires to say, I don't know this, tell me how this is kind of putting that ego aside, right? That ego of needing to be the expert, right? Can you remember a time? Did you remember a time when you all of a sudden realized the benefit of that, the benefit of not having the answers?
Yeah, I mean, I again, it's going back to a lot of the roles that I took on. Specifically going from design into development and engineering. When I was at Timberland, I mean, that was a world that I knew it. I knew it from design and development, because design and development in the footwear industry is what an industrial designer does. And so prior to being it, I had that experience from Hasbro and the roles I had prior to Hasbro. So I was I was a classic industrial designer. And so development and design, they're an easy mesh. But the engineering side and the supply chain side and how footwear works was completely new to me. And again, you benefit from relationships, is having key people that you work with. There was a guy, his name is Steve. He was an engineer, as a manufacturing engineer, and he kind of took me under his wing. We traveled together. We were in Taiwan for weeks on end, and I mean, I learned so much from him, and I learned so much from the guys that I knew in footwear, the kind of the quote unquote shoe dogs. You just realize you got to ask questions and just absorb. You learn from them, and when the approach you take into when you go into a role like that is just envision yourself as a sponge and just try to learn as much as you possibly can.
That's excellent. That's a great visual.
That's how I looked at it. And when we would send people over to Asia, over here for development trips, some of the advice given was like, go over there and learn as much as you possibly can. And you could see the ones who were successful, the ones who did that.
The ones who took it as a learning opportunity and not as a way to provide answers.
Right. They took it. They didn't look at it as a hardship. I got to go to Asia for 2 to 3 weeks. They would look at it, hey, this is a great way to advance my career and understand how things get done, how things get made.
That's great. That's great. So what was it like because, obviously I've done a ton of work in the footwear industry, and there's always that conversation of, would you consider moving to Asia? Would you consider moving into an expat kind of a role? And that's a big transition. That's like a step that a lot of people are like, oh, I don't know if I can. What? So you did that after, your kids were out of the house, right? And you said, this is a time when I can actually consider doing this for my family. What was that transition like? And what surprised you about some of it?
Well, I mean, I was asked when at Timberland, directly once and kind of indirectly, and I'd like to move over to China. And my daughters were young at that point. And, for me, it was, I would have enjoyed the job. I knew the work. I've been to China, 4 or 5 times a year. So it would have been an easier transition for me, but it just wasn't right for my family. Where I am today, and when I was going through my job search back in 2021, I had 3 offers all on the table in front of me. One was a company with, another footwear brand in the Boston area. One was a retailer in New York, and one was this job. And one was probably, a very comfortable role I could have easily taken. It was similar to what I was doing at Timberland. The other one was very different, but it really wasn't quite a fit. And this one was the biggest stretch, but it was the one I was most excited about. And like you said, at this point, I have 2 daughters who are in college. And, the sell to my wife was, hey, this is the time.
The big sell, right?
It's a big adventure. It's a big sell. But one of the things is like, well, one, we'd probably have to move to Boston from New Hampshire. The other one was, we got to move to New York City. I think she would have been excited about. But the other one was like, well, we get to keep our house in New Hampshire. Right. And
we just don't get to live in it very much. Yeah.
We're only going to be there a couple of months. And I said, in the summers, you can come home, when the girls are home from college, and you can spend the summer with them, and then you can come back. And so that's the world we're living in right now. And it's working out. And I mean, I really enjoy the work. I enjoy the team. I think, my team on the Merrill side, both in Rockford and here, are a really good group, and I'm enjoying that. And I enjoy the supply chain organization that I'm part of. A lot of talented people, and it's a really good group to work with. So I'm having a lot of fun.
So that's excellent. So the transition into that, you talked about kind of the sales pitch you put together for your wife to make that happen.
Oh, yeah. I had an Excel document with
I'm certain you did. I'm certain you did. Yeah.
I presented it to both my daughters and my wife, and we talked about it at dinner. And my daughter was like, "You want to move to Vietnam?"
It was the point in your life where you realized you also had sales skills, right? That you had just discovered that. Yes. What, so you obviously made that transition in terms of a new company, new job, all of that. What was it like to actually, however, be in Asia, and adjusting to both culturally that life change, and that's a separate organization. I mean, that was always kind of the organization that you communicated with before. You're basically on the other side of the table now. What was that like?
It was great. It was a great learning experience. It was definitely, like I said before, there was points in time where it was uncomfortable. I mean, I was, my first role coming over here, I was put in place to provide leadership on the ground in Vietnam, because our leadership in Hong Kong couldn't get there because of COVID and things like that. So they felt like a senior person. So they created the role that I fill. So I came in and I was providing that leadership. I had no direct reports. I had to work with the different functional groups to make sure that everyone was working together and we were kind of cohesively being successful as a team in Vietnam. And that was not like no other role I've had. I mean, I've had anywhere from 4 to 16 direct reports. And I've been responsible for, pretty large teams. And now I'm over here trying to be successful. I have no direct authority. I'm just trying to make it so I'm troubleshooting. I'm dealing with problematic factory leads and working with my counterparts in quality, commercialization, development to kind of making sure everything's going together. And so you had to kind of create, it was really about, how can I add value?
Right.
As is adding value.
And influence. It was more of you had to be able to influence as opposed to direct, right?
Right.
Yeah. So how was that? That's really interesting, Jeff, to go from having had control over an entire organization to having really no control over the organization, but needing to be impactful. So what was the shift that you made in your approach or in how you thought of what your role was in order to be successful?
Right. I think it goes back to one of the things I learned a long time ago. I was told that I was good at. I didn't realize I learned it, but I guess I was good at it. Was building relationships. That's a critical thing for any leaders, making sure that you're building relationships. Your peers, people above you and people below you, and making sure that you work well with them. And so going into the role is like, I need to be able to do that because these are all people that I don't know. I've met them all. And the footwear industry, we all kind of know people who know people. So there was some commonality there. but, it was building those relationships. And then, to what I'd said earlier was, I need to make sure in this role, I'm adding as much value to the organization as I possibly can. And so my approach was like, and I said this probably ad nauseum. It was like, hey, how can I help? It was like, what's going on? Is there something I can help you with? And I was constantly looking to whether it was a senior QA manager or a developer is like, hey, do you need any help with this? What can I do to help you? Or, I'd have someone on the Hong Kong side saying, hey, Jeff, could you go and get into this factory? We've got a problem. And so that was really the way I approached it. And, because you're in a role where you don't have a team, you don't have a direct reports, so like you've got to make sure you're the most valuable person you possibly can be.
Right.
And, and that's the way I took to the role. And I think it was, they saw as a benefit. And I think it's what kind of drove to me being offered the role in Merrill.
But in the role that you're in now. That's great.
Yeah.
That's excellent. And how are you enjoying Vietnam as a place to live?
It's great. I really do like it. I think the Vietnamese people are awesome. Everyone is super nice. It's an easy place to live. I live in an area called District 2. It's called Tao Dinh. Where a lot of expats live. There's a lot of international schools here. So there's tons of restaurants. There's plenty of things to do. A little bit of transition, like I don't have a car, on the weekends.
Oh yeah. So that's that's a different way of thinking, right?
Yeah. You just can't go jump in the car and go drive someplace. You're walking somewhere. In the rainy season, that makes it interesting.
That does make it interesting.
But it's definitely different. But I have to tell you, there's been time when I came back this summer and when I came back in December, I was looking forward to coming back because I was looking forward to getting back to work. I was looking forward to getting back to Vietnam.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, good for you. It sounds like your takeaway from your entire career was to get comfortable with being uncomfortable as a way to move forward, right?
Well, I realize that again, I think that's there's a ton of value in that because, you're building up your experience. If you're always in the same job, I'd said this to people too, within the organization, like a developer was like, well, I want to be you, Jeff. Meaning I was the VP of development. I was like, okay, so you really need to gain more experiences to the right, to the left of you, rather than just trying to go and climb straight
up and down. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. You've got to go left and right. And I think that there's a benefit to that. I mean, in the role that I'm in now, there was in the role I was in before with Wolverine and the one I'm in now, I think one of the big benefits I bring is, I had the footwear lead role at Timberland for a while. So I understand how the front end of the process works.
Sure.
And I understand what they're doing up there. And I think that it helps me on the development side of supply chain here. And so that moving around and getting different experiences, makes you stronger in the role that you're in.
Absolutely. It's an interesting thing that so often I think people they focus on that upward mobility without recognizing that horizontal mobility is really what enables them to have a broader impact as they move up within an organization. And oftentimes it's missed. Oftentimes, people don't, they think about their title. I'm a director here. The next thing I want to be is a senior director, when really the better thing to be is to be a director over there and a director over there to the left and right, as you say, in order to really kind of gain a much broader foundation of competence and experience and exposure. That's excellent. Well, you've definitely demonstrated that.
Yeah. And companies look at that. It's like, well, this guy, not talking about me, but anyone's like, hey, this person's been in development, and then they did a stint in supply chain, and then, product management, having that varied experience from a leadership perspective, I think is a huge plus. And
it shows elasticity, right? And to your point, it shows an ability to walk into something that you don't know and figure out how to add value in it, which, if you were to say, when you think about what you think is one of the most important skills as a leader, especially as a leader who can influence leaders, which is a lot of what you did when you walked into your most recent role before this one. What do you think that is? What do you think the most important skill is?
I would say, there's, when I talked about relationship building, humility, making yourself relatable, making yourself someone that, it's not like the boss, and make people comfortable. I've been described as being a humble person, and humility is I think is definitely a key attribute. I think that's good because it makes it easy for people to want to work with you. Easier for people to want to work with you. But yeah, I think that's one of the bigger.
Okay, that's excellent. So I'm a firm believer that our families are the very first organization we ever operate in. Okay,
Yeah.
like figuring out how you fit there and how you succeed there, and whether those experiences are positive or negative or whatever, they're our first experience. When you
Right.
think about your time, kind of growing up and fitting into that organization, what of those experiences do you think most informed your career or impacted your career?
I don't know. I mean, I think, I have an older brother and a younger sister, so I'm a middle child. And, observing, and it's my brother, I would watch with my brother and I are similar, but we're very different. We definitely had very different childhoods. And I kind of sat back and watched him. And he was more of a late bloomer when he went to college, but I watched which way he went and mistakes he made. I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that. So
I'm not
learned
doing
from
that.
his-
Right.
Right. And maybe it was just an age gap difference, but certainly growing up, I was closer with my sister who was younger than my brother was, and closer with my brother than my sister was. And so, I mean, they both live in St. Louis now, and they're obviously closer, but growing up, I was kind of the between the two.
So you knew how to navigate personalities.
Yeah. I mean, I probably had my moments with my younger sister, but, but that's just more sibling.
Sure.
Get along great now, but,
Right. But you were the go-between. You were the conduit.
Yeah. I would say, I know my mom may not both agree with me, but I was probably the easiest of the three kids go. And I think that might be a middle child thing, but,
it's funny because it sounds like you knew how to kind of mesh within an organization. You figured out how to mesh within an organization. And so it doesn't sound that dissimilar to what you did when you first moved to Vietnam. How can I be of service here?
Right.
That's excellent.
I mean, being easy to work with. And I said, and something where people feel comfortable with you. And I think, having a sense of humor is
critical to everything. Yeah. Yep. I agree with that.
Because it puts people at ease. And the times the roles that I've had where I think that, I've enjoyed myself the most, has been when, we're in an environment where you can be yourself and you can laugh and have a good time.
Sure.
Work is work, but if you're having fun doing your work, that's a huge plus.
Makes all the difference. Sure it does. So, if you could give your younger self any advice, what would the advice be? And how old would you be when you heard that advice?
It would have probably been, right when I got out of school. So
wow, early.
And it's because, so I was an industrial design major at the University of Kansas. So and you go through, you want to be a designer. I want to be a design consultant. I want to go into consulting because that's what true designers do. And that's what I went to Boston, I went to New York, I was in Chicago, I was interviewing and stuff. And I was interning with a place in Chicago and ended up working there. And it was fun. I learned a lot, but it's like, I didn't enjoy the work that it wasn't difficult. It was a really small design consultancy, really hard place to work. And then I got out of there and went back to St. Louis and worked on I was on the manufacturing team or the engineering team at a small manufacturer in St. Louis. And it's like, that got me out of kind of the slave galley that I was in Chicago.
Yeah.
And that was good. But then I realized it is that point where it dawned on me, it's like, hey, you know what? At the time I was a triathlete. I'd always been involved in sports, and shoe design was getting to be a big deal. This is when I met you.
That's right. That's when you met me.
And yeah, and that's why I was like, you know what, I want to get into shoe design. I mean, I would love to get into the bicycle design, but that was really more engineering, and industrial designers didn't. I mean, I didn't see a lot of opportunity there. But I started trying to get into shoes, and I ended up at Hasbro, which was another. I mean, it was also a fun place to work. And I grew up playing with GI Joes, and I was very into it. And that was a great time. And it actually gave me better experience, because my experience working at the manufacturer in St. Louis was not helping me in the shoe industry. You were trying very hard, but it was not helping me. But when I got to Hasbro, that helped. And then, at Hasbro, I realized like it was having fun at work was important, and enjoying what you're doing. In the toy business, you kind of get pigeonholed as a toy designer. And which at the time is like, and shoe designers tend to get pigeonholed too. I was like, well, if I'm going to get pigeonholed as a designer, I'm going to get pigeonholed as someone.
It's going to be in what I like.
Really
sure.
Enjoy, right. And the thing about footwear that I think is fantastic, and specifically from a design perspective, is it's very fast paced. There's a new season, you're working on 3 seasons. So you don't have like projects that last 6 months to a year. They last 3 months, and you've got a bunch of,
and you're on to something else. Yeah.
So it's really fast paced. And so it's a long answer to your question, but to me, as I learned to do things, to blend the things that I enjoy outside of work and make them part of my career.
Yeah.
That was important. And the 2 jobs I had prior to Hasbro were not that. I mean, they were jobs.
So your advice to yourself would be what?
Would be to pursue something, not because you think that's what, like I said, a real industrial designer is supposed to do.
What you're supposed to be.
Boy, yeah.
Right.
Do what you enjoy. And if your interests are XYZ and there's opportunity in that industry, do that.
Go do that. Align the 2 of them.
Yeah. There's a Facebook group that I was looking at it was like outdoor jobs business or something like it. It was about jobs in the outdoor industry. And most of them, I was much more of a senior person, but it was, listening to their podcasts and listening to them talk about, jobs in the outdoor industry. I mean, it's like, I would have loved to have had that. I would have been all over it. And you just hear these kids going like, I've been doing this. I want to, I've been doing photography in Colorado. I want to get on and write copy for that. And then, they're getting jobs and getting, approached by companies in the outdoor business. And that's just a fantastic way.
So connect your passion, have your work connect to your passion.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. That's
connect
great.
Your passion. Yeah.
So last question, when you get on the road to go someplace you haven't been before, you use GPS, I presume.
Yes.
Do you,
am I
you
driving
just plug in the address and go? When you used to drive a car, now you don't drive a car, but when do you plug
I have a driver.
You have a driver, yeah. How about if you're back
he knows
here,
where to go? I don't know where to go.
Do you plug in GPS and just follow it blindly, or do you have to have an overview and understand what the journey is going to look like?
I was always fascinated with maps as a kid.
Yeah.
I used to study them all. I mean, in 3rd grade, I knew all the capitals of the United States.
Right.
The teachers were my grade, my report card. But so I always look at a map and say, okay, where am I going?
Okay. So you plot it out. You've got a sense. I'll have an
idea. Now, GPS is a wonderful thing because
it's a great thing.
That way you're not slowing down trying to look at a map.
Right. But you have to look at an overview. I think my kids, I've noticed, they have no context of where they are now because they plug in an address and they just follow it blindly. And I think it's a generational thing that we like to look in context to where we're going, right? The big map. I'm a map girl myself, so.
Yeah. It was funny when my oldest daughter was starting to learn how to drive. I was like, and I would be driving. I said, we're going to go here. I go, tell me which way to go. It's like, well, because they're
because they don't. Yeah, that's right. They just plug it in. Yeah.
They don't know which way to turn right or left.
It's true.
Which direction they're going.
Right.
They just, dad and mom are going to get there.
Exactly.
It's like, look out the window. Look at where you are.
Like, there's a story associated to that, but I think a lot of people would think that there's a connection to that and getting your kids out of the house at this point. But they need it. They need a GPS. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for your time today. Blast Off. That's your name, right? G.I. Joe. Blast Off Man. There you go. So you can find G.I. Joe. You can find Jeff either on a shelf in the G.I. Joe section of your toy store.
Long since gone.
Long since gone. All right. Or you can find him in Ho Chi Minh City for now, where his wife has bought in on the adventure of living abroad, and he's enjoying the next phase of his career. So I thank you so much for your time today and for being a part of this.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure. And the takeaway, I say our takeaway from our show today is be comfortable with discomfort.
Yes.
That's excellent.
That's how you grow.
That's how you grow. That's true. Excellent. Thank you. Hey, thanks so much for joining us this week on Beyond Neutral. I'm your host, Paula Reed. Make sure to visit our website, www.readandco.com, for this week's show notes. And if you found value in today's episode, I would appreciate you giving us a rating on Apple Podcasts or share it with a friend. Also, don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. All of this helps to support the show. Have a great week.